Christopher Johnson was home alone in his 2-bedroom apartment for 6.5 hours before he discovered his fiancée, Andrea, brutally murdered inside their bedroom closet. It was a story that for many was hard to fathom. There should have been red flags all over their home, signs that something had happened, voicemails from friends, missing items. But Chris Johnson missed them all. Or did he? Hi there, I'm Kevin, and welcome to Just Thought Lounge. Today's case begins over 20 years ago under strange circumstances. Investigations and speculation continued throughout the following decades with even more bizarre developments. There's a lot going on in this case, and quite a few details of the story that haven't been fully fleshed out. Let's take a look. Arlington, Virginia is a well-off suburb of nearby Washington, D.C. In the late 1990s, it was much as it is now. A bustling and vibrant community, well connected to the city, but with a small town feel. James Christopher Johnson, or just Chris, was 26 years old when he met Andrea Cincotta on Labor Day, 1988. Andrea was 16 years older than Chris, though even they admitted that the age difference was not very noticeable. At 42 years old, Andrea had divorced her first husband, Howard, 5 years earlier. They had one child, 15-year-old Kevin. Andy, as she was known to friends, was a small but strong woman. Friends described her as active, whip-smart, and funny. She swam nearly every morning before work. After years of part-time study for her qualification, Andy became a librarian at the Arlington Public Library, where she shared her love of reading and learning with the community. Chris was a geologist. In this capacity, he was primarily employed by engineering firms, which led him to boastfully refer to himself as an engineer. Though not technically the case, it was a designation that appeared in many of his job roles at the time. After 3 years together, in the summer of 1991, Chris and Andy became engaged to be married. They moved into a 2-bedroom condo in Colonial Village. They also began building their dream home together by the Rappahannock River in Lancaster. They called the half-built structure the beach house. The couple were doing the work themselves, cutting logs and putting up walls. It was a labor of love and a manifestation of the future that Chris and Andy were building together. By August of 1998, Chris and Andrea had been living together for about 7 years. They had never gotten around to planning a wedding. Andrea's son Kevin, now 24 years old, had moved out of the condo, though they still referred to the second bedroom as Kevin's room. It was just past 1:30 a.m. on August 22nd when Chris awoke in the main bedroom. He had been home alone since returning from work at about 6 p.m. Chris reported going to sleep at around 11:30, believing that Andy would be arriving home later. At 1:30, Chris stretched out and realized that Andy was not beside him. She had not returned home. A moment later, he spotted the closet door, which was always left wide open. It was sitting slightly ajar. The closet door had always malfunctioned. It never latched shut. The door position in this state was the closest to a fully closed position that Chris had ever seen it, which was quite odd. He got out of bed to take a look. Unable to see clearly, he turned on a light. When Chris did so, he discovered Andy. She was tucked into the back of the shallow closet, her feet pushed up to rest on a small crate that sat on the floor. She was cold to the touch.
Arlington 911, what is your emergency?
I need an officer at 17.
What's going on?
I thought my girlfriend was missing.
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't seen her. We were supposed to go out tonight.
Mm-hmm.
But I figured I'd give her some time. I think she's dead.
You think so?
Yeah, in
Right.
the closet. The door was closed. I didn't look in the closet. She's laying over on her side. She's cold.
So you were supposed to go out tonight, and she didn't answer. She didn't call you.
Well, I mean, we've been living together for 7 years.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I mean, it wasn't like her at all.
Okay. All right. What's your name, sir?
James Christopher Johnson.
Okay. Okay. So she is cold to the touch then?
Yes.
All right. Are you out in the living room away from her?
In a bedroom.
Okay. You're in the bedroom. Are you in the same bedroom where she is?
No.
Okay. So you were out then and you just came home and found her?
No, I got home at 6. I did my laundry. She must have been in the place the whole time, but I just didn't look in the closet.
Okay.
The closet door was closed. What's weird is some stuff looks like it was missing.
Okay. What do you mean things look like?
I had a whole rolls of nickels and dimes. They're gone. And I had a green bag that's gone.
All right, when you came home tonight, did anything look strange when you came in the apartment? I mean, did it look like the lock was messed with or anything?
The deadbolt was not locked, but the doorknob was locked.
Okay, so the deadbolt was not?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I've been home the whole time.
Firefighters were the first to arrive to the home. Chris waited in the living room while responders checked on Andrea. They found that she had clearly been in the closet for several hours, likely well before Chris had returned home at 6. It had taken nearly 7 hours for him to discover her. While Chris waited on law enforcement, he noticed that Andrea's purse was also missing from inside the doorway. The keys to her car, a blue Honda Civic, were also missing. Of course, he had not seen her car in the lot when he came home either. Andy's car was not there. In addition, he noted that rolls of coins appeared to be missing. Chris said a green gym bag, which had been next to the bed, was also gone. Had there been a robbery, however, it was a poorly executed one. Cash sat out in plain sight. Andrea still wore an expensive watch. Curiously, there were other items missing. Much later, Kevin would discover that his mother's will was not in the drawer alongside her other important papers. When law enforcement arrived, their first impression was of an apartment recently cleaned. The carpets had been freshly vacuumed. There were no signs of forced entry into the home, nor were there any indications of where the murder could have taken place. Each room was in order. If Andrea had struggled against her attacker, there were no signs of this occurring in the condo. A forensic team identified over 600 finger or palm print samples for testing across the apartment. Many of these were in areas where prints were expected to be found, such as the front door, handles, and frequently used items. However, just over a dozen of these were viable samples, of which 6 prints were matched, all to Chris Johnson. What was odd was that not a single match to Andrea was found anywhere in the unit, though she had lived there for 7 years. There were no fingerprints found on the vacuum, which had been recently used, nor were there any on the hallway closet door, its handle, or frame. It seemed that the cleaning within the apartment had been extremely thorough. Chris was brought in to speak with Arlington County Police that night for several hours. This interview, as well as the one that took place the next day, were not recorded. On the third and final day that Chris was interviewed, without an attorney, there was a camera in the room. At some points in the video, law enforcement inserted a square mask over a portion of the recording, censoring the computer screen. It's unclear why. Over the course of over 20 cumulative hours across 3 sessions in so many days, Chris outlined his movements from the day of the murder in great detail. He began with entering the condo around 6 p.m. and calling out to Andy, whom he assumed was already at home. When he had no response, he entered the bathroom and had a shower. Crucially, he reported not noticing anything out of the ordinary at that time, aside from the deadbolt not being locked on the front door when he entered.
Called out her name, but didn't hear anything. I went, I took a shower.
Chris and Andy had made plans to see a movie that night, either at the theater or a rental at home. For this reason, he assumed she was coming home in good time, he said. That is, until he listened to the 5 unplayed messages left on the answering machine. The machine sat next to a telephone directly to the left of the bedroom closet, its door ajar, with Andy inside. In Chris's written statement to police, he reported that it was while he stood listening to these phone messages that he glanced around and noticed that the carpets had been vacuumed. This was regularly done by Andy on the weekends, not throughout the week. The first message left by Andy's friend Sarah should have raised alarm bells. The librarian had taken a rare day off of work, yet she had missed her scheduled lunch date.
Just checking to see that you're all right. It's 2 o'clock on Friday. Bye-bye.
3 of the 5 messages were from Chris himself. Between professional work at engineering firms, he was taking shifts in the receiving department at Home Depot. From there, he called mid-afternoon to check in, then twice as he approached the end of his shift.
Hi, it's me. It's about 2:15. Looking to try to get home about 5:30. If you want, you can go ahead and give me a call. We can confirm whether we're going to the movies or renting it in. Otherwise, I'll see you tonight. Love you. Bye.
The other message, which was received mid-afternoon, was from another friend of Andy's. This friend had a family member hospitalized in critical condition. Andy had been helping out by taking care of her children during this time.
Andy, it's Judy. I'm at home. We have some bad news. Give me a call if you get this. I'll talk to you later. Okay, bye.
Chris told police that when he heard this message, he assumed that Andy had listened to it and had gone to Judy's. The only problem with this logic is that by his own admission, all 5 messages were unplayed when he listened to them, and he could not have heard any of them. He later rang Judy, who was not at home, to see if Andy was there. He never called Sarah, who had left the message concerned for Andy's welfare at 2 p.m. After checking messages and having a shower, Chris began cleaning up. He tidied the front cab of his truck, throwing out old papers, he said, as well as several soda cans. He took the trash directly out to the apartment dumpsters. Inside the unit, he began doing laundry. Chris told detectives that he watched some television and then went to bed.
The last A&W root beer. I eat approximately 4 crackers. Then I lay down on the bed. So I get up, open the door, look down. I look in the closet and I think I see something on the floor. And I look in and then I find her body in the closet.
Crime scene photos show laundry baskets, the same as those Chris stated that he was using, sitting to the left of the closet door.
All the baskets, held it over to one side, dropped the bottom one, which is a blue one.
Detectives hammered Chris repeatedly over how he could have spent so many hours in the apartment without noticing that a door which was never closed had been.
In the course of the time that you were home, you must have gone past that closet at least 5 times from your explanation to me, and you never noticed that the door was closed.
No.
But you woke up from basically asleep, but right away you noticed that the door was closed?
Mm-hmm.
Why is that?
It's probably open about that much.
Mm-hmm.
But usually it's open more.
Uh-huh. Usually? What does that mean?
She keeps the door of her closet open.
Okay, define open. You mean ajar, or do you mean like halfway open, completely open?
Completely open.
So this door would normally be back here?
Would be straight out.
But if you
can't open
if
it
this door was
that way.
closed and you decided to open it, would this door go all the way back to that wall, or
it would open 90 degrees.
That the door sat slightly open and the closet itself was shallow suggests it may have been possible earlier in the evening to see Andy inside. It raised the question of how he stood next to the answering machine the moment when he claimed to notice the carpets had been vacuumed and not noticed the door. Chris appeared to struggle to recall where his gaze was focused at each point while in the room. At one stage explaining that he scanned the room carefully for his keys, but abruptly stopped as his eyes reached the closet.
To backtrack a little bit, sometime I can't believe I forgot that. I brought my clothes up from the laundry room. We're backtracking to that. And I put my clothes away, and then I looked for my keys, because the door was unlocked when I went in. and I don't find my keys.
Mhm.
And I look around. I look where I had been, and when I look for something, I scan the area like that, and I scanned across the dresser. I sort of stopped at the dresser and then moved over past to the bed because I hadn't really been over there since I had a blast.
Since you had a what?
Since I had the keys last,
Okay.
which is by the window by the hamper.
Chris was also asked to explain his decision not to use the phone directly next to the closet to dial 911, opting instead to go through to the living room seeking another device, which was not charged, then to Kevin's room to make the call.
Her phone, it's an old rotary one where you click it 9 over and then you let it go and it clicks back.
Yeah.
And so I like the technology push button, so I have very rarely used that one. And I went to the phone and dialed 911. Actually, I picked it up as like, it is an emergency, 911. I hesitated maybe a second before calling because it's, she was already dead. And then I called 911 and the lady answered and I said,
A picture of what had happened to Andrea was only beginning to form. Many details remained murky, and Arlington detectives at this stage were proceeding primarily on their suspicions. Their focus on Chris Johnson appeared to be well-founded when the 33-year-old happened to spot Andrea's blue Honda Civic abandoned on the roadside while on his way home from the police station. Much like the apartment, forensic teams retrieved nothing of value in the car. It had been wiped clean of prints and DNA. They did find that the clutch was burned out, hence why it had been abandoned. The other missing items from the condo were never recovered. By Monday, August 24th, the autopsy report on Andrea Cincotta had been completed. It concluded that Andy had died of strangulation. Bruises on her arms and elsewhere indicated that she had put up a struggle. She also had an abrasion on her forehead, though this was not what killed her. The report also found what was described in the investigative notes as an unusual pattern on the top of her right thigh. It was triangular in shape with a curved line on one side. Expert analysis comparing a pair of Chris Johnson's 9.5 sized New Balance sneakers, the pair he had been wearing that day, concluded that they were a match. The lab report stated that the likelihood that any other item caused the pattern was remote. Indeed, the pathologist concluded that the pattern had taken to the skin because it was damp. Andy had likely just been for a swim, or perhaps just out of the shower. The footprint aside, the autopsy concluded that Andrea's time of death was earlier that afternoon, that is, while Chris was at work. Aside from a short trip out for fried chicken on his lunch break, which was verified, his time that day was fully accounted for by coworkers. They also had not established a convincing motive. According to Chris and others, the relationship was unremarkable. There were no open issues. Except Chris said there would be suspicious charges on his credit card. He eventually admitted to police to spending time on websites, pornographic ones, that Andy would not have approved of. This included paying $2 per minute on certain live cam websites. He developed an email relationship with at least one of these cam girls. As far as he knew, Andy was not aware of any of this.
You give them like a credit card number, and they do whatever.
Did you meet somebody in the chat room and meet with them?
Did I meet them? No. I talked with a girl that I've met on they call it the Intimate Friends Network, and I've sent maybe 2 to 3 emails to her.
With few strings left to pull, detectives decided to lie to Chris about the evidence they had against him, hopefully to elicit a confession. He was told that the autopsy placed Andrea's death after he returned home, and that they also had his fingerprints on her body. Based on these supposed facts, they said, there was no other explanation. He must be her killer. They did not reveal to him her cause of death.
Did you already know that Andy was in the closet?
No.
And you're sure about that?
From what I know, yes.
Now, why are you defining that? Why are you kind of qualifying from what you know?
Because what Detective Brennan's partner said was that my fingerprints were on her body, and that her time of death was after I got home. That does not jive with what I believe happened.
Okay, did you place Andy in that closet?
I do not remember placing her in the closet. Based on what I've been told in this building, I can draw no other conclusion, i.e., that I must have placed her in the closet, because they said my fingerprints were on her body, and not just on her arm. They said her time of death was after I got home at 6 o'clock.
Tell the truth. If what happened was an accident, tell me that was an accident.
I have no idea what happened to her.
After 25 hours of interviewing with police, spread out over a period of 3 days, Chris Johnson was prompted to imagine what could have happened to Andy. At this point, he began to describe an altercation between the two of them. The argument began over his spending habits, he said. Andy had found out about the charges he had made on his credit card. She discovered that he had spent excessive sums on live cam girls.
You can begin by telling the truth, Chris, from the very beginning to the end. And no doubt it's painful. I believe it. You loved her. She loved you.
Did I push her? Did I hit her?
Chris, don't play those mind games.
I don't know what I did.
Yes, you do. You absolutely do. And when you hit her, how do you hit her? Show me how you hit her. So like, with your hand open like that?
Yeah.
It's like, no. And when you hit her like that, what does she do?
She falls.
And show me again how you did it.
She's standing right there. I try to reach for a pulse.
Do you feel a pulse, Chris?
No.
There's no pulse.
No.
The altercation that Chris described may have resulted in the injury that Andy had to her forehead. Damage to her side could also be explained by her falling to the ground on her left side, as he described in his imaginative statement. What Chris's confession, later deemed his vision dream statement, got wrong was a key fact: how Andrea had actually died. He never admitted or even hinted at strangulation. Investigators continued to speak to everyone in Chris Johnson's life. They found that while the self-proclaimed engineer was happy to divulge his online behaviors, he was less forthcoming with his offline pursuits. Police recorded speaking with a neighbor in the Colonial Village building who received flowers on Valentine's Day from Chris in both 1997 and 1998. He would also bring her cookies. Chris brought over a movie for them to watch while Andrea was in England helping Kevin move out of a dorm. One neighbor reported that Chris would show up wherever she was. He knew where she worked out, and he knew she ran her own company. The notes also state that at one point, Chris was looking in her apartment. He was peeping in her windows. The police file also discussed at least one other date with yet another woman that Chris went on and never told Andrea about. With an airtight alibi and a largely uncorroborated confession, Chris was released and charges were not pursued. In the months and years that followed, Andrea's family, and Kevin in particular, supported her fiancé. They were unaware of any issues the couple had and knew Chris to be a non-confrontational and agreeable guy. Also, the family already had a prime suspect, a man they called the computer guy. A few weeks prior to the murder, Andy had spotted a workman from a company called Trash Masters doing work outside of the condo building. She was seeking to dispose of an old computer and approached the worker to inquire if he would take it off her hands. This man told her that the company did not recycle computers, but if it still worked, he would take it for his personal use. Andy agreed. She let the man into the condo and led him straight into the bedroom to collect the computer. The computer guy reportedly left his name and phone number. They were later in contact to discuss how it was working for him. Arlington investigators tracked down the computer guy, a man named Bobby Joe Leonard. Bobby had a criminal record. Indeed, he was in custody for an alleged assault when investigators found him. He denied any involvement in Andy's murder and gave a DNA sample. Andrea's family was told that he was then eliminated as a suspect. Over the next 2 decades, the case grew cold. The family hired a private investigator who also managed to track down Bobby Joe. In their view, he remained the prime suspect.
Her son, Kevin Cincotta, asked me to come in and look at this case because the case was going nowhere. At that point in time, the police had focused entirely on Andrea Cincotta's fiancé, Chris Johnson, who they lived together, and they believed he killed her, in spite of the fact he actually ended up having an alibi that was locked, airtight alibi. And in spite of that, they still had their eyes on him. This is police misconduct. They did not properly investigate the crime at all. They were so intent on making him guilty. They forced a confession out of him, which is what this is all about. They forced a confession out of him, a false confession. And then after he gave this false confession, they found out that Andrea Cincotta was murdered while he was at work, so he couldn't have even done it. And then the case just died right there.
Shortly after Andrea's murder, Bobby Joe had returned to his home in Philadelphia, where he was arrested following an assault on his ex-wife. Upon his release for this conviction, he was swiftly arrested and convicted again, this time for attempted murder. Bobby Joe had strangled his victim and dragged her into a closet. Eerily similar circumstances to Andy's murder. For this crime, he received a life sentence. In 2018, a cold case detective looking into Andrea's case visited Bobby Joe where he was serving time at Wallen Ridge, a level 5 state prison in Virginia. Now, however, serving a life sentence with no chance of release, Bobby had a story to tell.
So I do appreciate you giving me the opportunity to listen to what you have to say. My only request is that please let it deal.
It will be.
All right, well, you got the floor then.
Well, it started, because I was working through a temp company. I don't even know the dates of that, but I was working.
Bobby explained how Andrea had called him over outside of her building and asked about recycling the computer. After he took the device from her, he left his information, including his phone number, on a piece of paper. She called to follow up a couple of days later. During that call, she handed the phone over to her boyfriend, or husband, he said, because he knew more about the computer. It was this man that called him again a few days later. But that time, the man was asking personal questions.
I gave her my name and telephone number. She eventually called, maybe a day or two later she called, I think, and asked me, was I able to hook it up and everything. We had a talk for a little while. After that, a gentleman called me. When he called me, he asked me a whole lot of just strange questions. It wasn't about the computer at all. It was, that's how it started off. It was like a pretense of a computer. But after that, he just asked me kind of like, family, work and stuff like that, more personal questions, and I answered them, as much as I can remember, I answered. But I thought at the time that it was weird. And he said that he would be back in touch. All of this happened. I got a telephone call from the same gentleman. Mm-hmm. And when I talked to him, he said, kind of like, it was more along the lines of, he knows me pretty well. And, he said that he knew that I had been locked up from 1993 until earlier that year, 1998. And I was asking him, how do you know all of this? And if I'm not mistaken too, I think he told me that he was like an engineer of some kind. I'm not too sure, but I think he said that he was an engineer. But I asked him, how did you know that I had been locked up and stuff, and he was telling me he knew that I'd been locked up. He knew what I'd been locked up for, so on and so forth. And he told me that that's what makes him interested in me. And we started to have a conversation of he's got something that he wants done. And at some point I just had to keep on pushing him as to what is it that you want done, and he started to tell me about the woman that gave you the computer, that she was what he wanted done. And so I had to ask him again, what do you want done? And he was just telling me, you have to know what I mean by all of this, and stuff. So we went through this kind of like riddle thing for a long time. So it was a long conversation. But
eventually, it was made clear that if Bobby Joe took care of Andrea quietly without the use of a gun, there would be $5,000 in cash left for him inside a shoe in the bedroom closet.
He told me that she would be home after I think it was either after 12 or after 1 p.m. that following day. If I took care of what he wanted me to take care of, I could have the money.
It was unusual for Andy to take days off of work for no particular reason, as she had chosen to do on the day she died. Most Fridays, she would be at work all afternoon. Indeed, her plans that morning to go for a swim, stop at the library briefly, and then return to the condo by 1 p.m. would have been known only to a select few individuals, including Chris. Bobby told detectives that he went to the condo building that day for 1 p.m. as instructed. He knocked on the front door and Andy answered. They chatted at the doorway for a few minutes.
Told her I have to go, but would you mind if I get something to drink before I leave? And she said, oh, sure. She went into the kitchen. She came back with like a root beer, I think it was.
When Andy returned with a root beer, Bobby recounted casually and without emotion how he attacked her. He claimed that she did not fight back.
As soon as I reached out and touched her, she just laid down on the ground.
He dragged her from the front door to the bathroom. Bobby claimed to have run water into the tub and dunked Andy in it. He said he did this to verify that she was no longer breathing. It would account for the pathologist's determination that her skin had been damp. His next move was towards the bedroom, and then the closet.
Into the bedroom and started looking around the closet for the money that was supposed to have been there. And I looked like everywhere. I looked in shoes, I looked in jacket pockets and stuff like that, and there was just absolutely nothing.
Bobby Joe described tearing apart the closets in both bedrooms, looking for the $5,000. When he couldn't locate it, he decided to steal a large water jug full of coins. Due to its size, he needed to also steal Andy's car.
So I was driving down 295 and the car broke down. The clutch, something was like really wrong with the clutch. It wasn't working too good and it broke down. I pulled it over to the side.
He wiped down the car to remove his prints. When he later rolled the coins from the jug, it totaled roughly $650. When asked if he was angry over not receiving the payment he was offered, Bobby explained that his intention was to kill the boyfriend who had lied to him about the $5,000. But he was arrested for the assault of his ex-wife before he was able to do so.
But I got arrested too fast because if not for the fact that I had gotten arrested, I definitely was going to find that person, no doubt about it. But I went to Philadelphia and got arrested.
Bobby stated that he never got the man's name and they never met in person.
When I first talked to the person, that was her boyfriend, because he said that he was the one that was getting the computer. Mm-hmm. He was an engineer or something like that,
okay.
And
that was the same person that called the next time.
Right. And he said, then in the end, I just said, I really don't think that I am being set up. I really do think this is a chance to make $5,000, and it was a chance that I was willing to take. I especially knew.
Crucially, Bobby Joe told the detective that he did not clean up the apartment before leaving. The floors from the bathroom into the bedroom would have been wet, the blinds left open, his root beer can left out. Bobby also stated that he simply closed the door behind him when he left. Although he had taken Andy's keys, he did not recall locking the front door, though Chris had stated that he had unlocked it. The piece of paper containing Bobby's name and phone number was never located in the condo. That Andy, at least, had this paper for reference is undisputed. Bobby Joe was not shown crime scene photos until months after his initial statements. When he was presented with the images of how the condo appeared when emergency responders arrived, he insisted it was not as he left it. In his written statement, he stated, "Beginning at the front door of the apartment, there was and should have been an unopened soda can lying on the floor not far from the front door. I walked into the living room area after the initial attack and I pulled the blind shut. The bathroom should have been the messiest place in the apartment. There should have been water all over the floor. I didn't do anything to try to clean it up. The shower curtain was open. I just dragged the wet body from the bathroom into the master bedroom. And then there's the closet in the master bedroom. No way was it as organized, clean, or neat as it appears in this picture. I searched that closet pretty good in search of the money that I was promised. I picked up shoes, moved them around. I was moving everything that was in my way out of my way to find the money." Bobby also stated that he left Andy on the floor of the closet without resting her feet on the crate. Based on the photos, he asserted that she too had been moved. Seeking to verify Bobby Joe Leonard's allegations, undercover officers posed as his family members and approached Chris Johnson on the street outside of his home. They asked him to pay up for the money owed to Bobby Joe.
"I'm kin to Bobby Leonard. He said that you would be able to help us out, that you owe money from before."
I don't owe him any money.
"Okay. He just said that you did. It doesn't have to be right this second, but if you could help us, that would be excellent."
This is very, very strange.
When the first undercover officer failed to elicit any directly incriminating statements from Chris, they tried again. Indeed, Chris was approached on 3 separate occasions by officers claiming to be related to Bobby.
"I think you know why I'm here on behalf of my brother Bobby."
Actually, no, I don't know why you're here.
"Okay. Well, are you going to pay my brother the money?"
First of all, I need my lawyer. Okay? Okay, sure. Arlington County Police.
"Okay."
Chris did not contact the police after these encounters. He did reportedly call a phone number which was provided to him to arrange the payment. No money was ever exchanged. His intention in dialing the number is unclear. Desperate to move the case forward, the next attempt to catch Chris Johnson in a lie was made by Andrea's son, Kevin. In the many years following her death, Kevin and other family members began to suspect that Chris had in fact played some role in the murder. After Bobby Joe's confession, this sentiment seemed well supported. Kevin asked Chris to lunch on the 20th anniversary of his mother's death. The two had grown apart over these years. Chris had married and moved on with his life. Kevin asked the man that had previously been like a father to him why he had confessed to police back in 1998.
I was so up by their interrogation, the lack of sleep, 3 days without sleep, that they hadn't believed that I had done it.
So the things they introduced, it didn't happen that way.
Not at all.
How did it happen?
I came home, didn't even find her till 1:30 in the morning in their
Don't do that, Chris. Do you think my mom would be proud of that?
Yes. Actually, she's probably not proud of me for how I caved in at the Arlington County Police.
Chris repeatedly denied any involvement, though he did make 2 statements that were inconsistent with the story he swore to 20 years earlier. Namely, he now claimed that he had vacuumed the condo that night.
Did there come a point that evening that you did laundry?
That evening, yes, I did do that.
Did there come a point that you vacuumed?
Yes.
Chris's second inconsistency related to the only potential motive that he could have had to want Andy gone, the beach house. She paid roughly $250 per month towards it, a larger sum back in 1998 than it would be now. Kevin had surmised that if his mother had discovered Chris's online activities, she would have considered it a betrayal, tantamount to cheating. If this was the case and they had a blow-up argument, Andy was in a position to kick Chris out of the condo that she owned and then also make a claim on half of the beach house. Indeed, Andy had stated in an email to her cousin only a few weeks prior to her death that if they ever split, she would hope that Chris would buy her out of her half of the beach house. 20 years on, Chris claimed that Andy was not paying any money towards the house at all.
Part of the money she was giving you toward the beach house was going to that.
What money did she give me for the beach house?
My understanding from the time is she was giving you between, this is rough, $300 and $400 a month toward the beach house.
No, not a bit.
Not a penny?
Yep.
In November 2021, 59-year-old James Christopher Johnson was arrested and charged with his former fiance's murder. He went to trial in 2023. The case against Chris was relatively weak. It largely rested upon the testimony and trustworthiness of Bobby Joe Leonard, a man so comfortable with lying that he believed polygraphs did not work if the person taking it, such as himself, simply didn't care much about admitting to killing people. With the evidence available, it seemed that one of two scenarios were likely to be true. The first, that Chris Johnson was a criminal mastermind or an incredibly lucky killer. He had successfully hired a hitman without divulging his identity or paying him. He thoroughly cleaned the crime scene, leaving no direct evidence of who committed the act or his own culpability. Perhaps most unbelievable would be his ability to provide a confession to the murder in such a way that multiple experts would later deem it a textbook example of a coerced and false admission of guilt, therefore spoiling the case that was being built against him. The second option was that Chris was an unwitting accomplice after the fact. If Bobby's statements of how he committed the murder and left the apartment are even partially true, Chris's actions when he came home that night helped to cover up the crime. At trial, the defense argued that the Arlington police bungled the investigation. They proceeded with blinders on, focused only on Chris Johnson. It is unclear if the trash was searched for the items Chris threw away that night, such as the root beer can, Andrea's will, and the paper with Bobby's name and phone number on it. The vacuum bag was not opened until trial. When it was, it proved to be uninformative. The defense further argued that Bobby Joe was motivated to claim that the killing was a murder for hire by promises of a lighter sentence and transfer to another prison. Ultimately, he did not benefit from his testimony. He was already serving a life sentence without parole, and the death penalty in Virginia had been abolished by the time he took the stand. He had a transfer to a more desirable institution approved at the time of his testimony, but due to his guilty pleas in Andrea's murder, he no longer fit the criteria and the transfer approval was revoked. This actually left him worse off than if he had stayed quiet. Regardless, Chris's defense team successfully argued that Bobby believed he would benefit from his testimony. The cold case detective had told Bobby before his confession that she had helped out murder-for-hire defendants before, should he have anything to say. In addition, Chris's defense argued Bobby didn't need the promise of a payment to commit murder. He had established a pattern of similar assaults independently in the years that followed. Though these crimes all included a sexual element, in Andrea's case, nothing of this nature occurred, so it was questionable whether this could have been his motive. It seems the Commonwealth of Virginia also failed to argue that Chris had a convincing motive. It was revealed at trial that he independently owned the land where the beach house was being built. Perhaps the least helpful to the prosecution's case was their decision to play Chris's third and final 7-hour-long interrogation session to the jury in its entirety. Jurors watched while the police repeatedly lied to Chris about the facts surrounding Andrea's death, leading up to his bizarre dream vision. The jury did not believe Bobby Joe Leonard, and they were appalled by the interrogation tactics used on Chris Johnson. Their deliberation was shockingly brief, taking less than an hour. When they returned, they found Christopher Johnson not guilty of the murder. The jury foreman later told the media that the short discussion in the jury room centered around how the case had even been brought against him to begin with. Shortly after the verdict, Chris filed a lawsuit against the cold case detective for malicious prosecution, claiming that she lied to a grand jury in order to obtain an indictment. The lawsuit claimed that she told jurors that Bobby Joe Leonard identified him by name, which he did not. The convict did, however, clearly state that it was Andrea's boyfriend who he believed he was speaking with. The lawsuit was eventually dismissed with prejudice.
I don't need a guilty verdict to know the truth about what happened to my mother. I'm obviously saddened and disappointed, but I accept the result.
That was the strange and tragic case of Andrea Cincotta. Thanks for joining me. I'm Kevin. This is Just Thought Lounge, and I'll see you in the next one.
Tell me who the scream saves, I can hear the cries repeat. Gotta take my time, cause these crimes get deep, but these stories can't hide. Let me find my seat. Kevin, go ahead and settle in. Gotta be selective. Doing